Today, we're going to talk about Britishness, if there even is such a thing, because a new bit of research conducted by the Institute for Public Policy Research shows that more and more people believe you have to be born in the UK to be truly British. The numbers are staggering. 36% of people now think that you've got to be born in Britain to be British, and that's up from only 19% 2 years ago. What the poll shows is what I think we already instinctively know, that the social and political conversation is shifting in ways that are very problematic politically for the government, but very positive politically for Reform UK. 71% of Reform voters say they would be prouder of Britain if fewer people from minority ethnic backgrounds were living here in a decade's time. 10% of them said it is important to have a white skin to be a British citizen, a good British citizen, which is palpable nonsense, and I hope the best news contained in that statistic is that 90% of Reform voters told pollsters they do not share that viewpoint. But the IPPR says the numbers in this poll require the Prime Minister to double down on his pledge to fight for the soul of our country and counter ethno-nationalist views that are increasingly front and centre in the political conversation. Remember this from the Prime Minister's speech at the Labour Party conference in October?
We can choose decency or we can choose division, renewal or decline. A country proud of its values, in control of its future, or one that succumbs against the grain of our history to the politics of grievance. It is a test, a fight for the soul of our country.
Well, this new research suggests that he is struggling to win that battle. Now, look, it's stunning that anybody thinks you have to have a white skin to be a good British citizen, but even the research's most general discovery that 36% of people now think you've got to be born in the UK to be properly British beggars belief. Let's just consider some of the people who were not born here and who I think we ought to be able to agree are properly British. Sir Cliff Richard, he was born in India. Freddie Mercury, he was born in Zanzibar. Joan Armatrading, one of my favourite Brits, she was born in St Kitts. Emma Watson, she made the grave mistake of being born in Paris. And Ncuti Gatwa, he was born in Rwanda. Audrey Hepburn, Eliza Doolittle herself, she was born in Belgium. And don't forget Boris Johnson. He was born in New York City. I mean, the list goes on, and obviously reveals the lie that so many people are embracing, that if you're not born here, you can't be truly British. I want to know how you feel about this conversation. For me, it's pretty personal. I have not lived in this country for the best part of 4 decades, but still feel as British as I felt the day I left, probably even more so. My mother was not born here. She made a new life in London after deciding that apartheid South Africa was not a place where she could happily reside. Having been welcomed here with open arms in 1958, she felt more British than probably anyone I have ever met. So what does Britishness mean to you? And are you worried that the definition is rapidly shifting and that more and more people here are embracing the falsehood that to be British, you've got to be born in Britain? Call me now at 0345 6060 973. You can text me at 84850. You can ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC and tell us what Britishness means to you. To kick off our conversation this afternoon, I'm delighted to be joined by Anouschka Rajah, Research and Analysis Manager at the polling company More in Common. Anouschka Rajah, thanks so much for being on the programme today. There's no question that this latest data shows a hardening in attitudes that is taking place across the UK and across society. Good afternoon.
Hi, thanks for having me here. Yeah, I think you're right that we're seeing a hardening of attitudes towards immigration and a real appetite among the public, based on the conversations that I have with them in focus groups, for quite a meaningful conversation about what it means to be British and indeed to become British for those born outside of Britain.
And explain what sort of Britishness means in those terms. I see that the survey suggests that hard-right narratives are having some success in remoulding the public's conception of national identity, although popular opinion still supports a progressive vision of Britishness based on shared values rather than ethnicity or ancestry.
It's quite a hard one to define, isn't it, Britishness? I think we all kind of have an idea of what it means to us, but it's quite a personal question. When it comes to being able to become British, for the public, it's really a question of contribution. There's a sense that citizenship needs to be tied more to contribution and also more conditional over a longer period. Many people now feel like migrants aren't fully paying their way. So especially during times of economic strain, when people often take a more zero-sum view of benefits, so seeing people who come here benefiting at the expense of British citizens, you can see that people have economic concerns around whether migrants are contributing. And as well as economics, there's a social aspect. So there's concerns that if migrants aren't socially contributing to the fabric of communities in the UK, then are they really British?
And it's very difficult, I think, to separate the results of this poll and sort of view them in isolation, because they do come at the end of a year in which it is clear from successive polls that have been conducted throughout the year that most voters in the country now think that the number one issue facing the country is immigration, which was not the case just a few months ago when people would have said it was the economy.
Yeah, I would say there's twin concerns of the economy and immigration, but we've seen that salience of migration and channel crossings rising over the last year or two. It's clear it's become more salient in political discourse as well. And slightly that political debates are drawing attention to these issues, but it's also true that politicians are talking publicly about questions that a lot of people are worried about or concerned about privately as well.
Anouschka, thank you. No, please finish. Go ahead and finish.
I think the rise of reform reflects that the rhetoric here is resonating with real people's concerns as well.
Anouschka Rajah, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. She's the Research and Analysis Manager at the polling company More in Common. We're also joined this afternoon by Dominic Selwood, historian and author of Anatomy of a Nation, a history of British identity in 50 documents. Mr. Selwood, thank you very much indeed for being on the programme today. I mean, this survey does show that attitudes are hardening year on year, and that is going to pose a real problem in 2026 for Keir Starmer as he attempts to kind of make good on that pledge that he made to win the fight for the soul of the nation.
Hello, Simon. Well, thanks very much. I think the first thing about this that strikes me is there are two very different concepts here. One is the passport test. What do you have to do to get a British passport, right? And there are some very strict rules around having a British parent or a settled parent, where you're born and so on, or naturalisation, right? We're not talking about that here. What this is a social idea, an attitude of what Britishness is, or what it means to be British. And I think it's quite important to realise that those are two very different things. And when Keir Starmer speaks about the soul of the country, as a historian, I'm really fascinated by that because, you know, Britishness only really comes into being really after the union with Scotland. So if we look through the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, what do people say when they talk about Britishness? Well, it's very much not an ethno-nationalist conversation. So, for example, the Times in the 1850s runs two very, very important articles, and it says that Britain is the asylum of nations. We are the place, and we will defend it to the last drop of our blood and the last ounce of our treasure, where we are incredibly proud to receive anybody who needs a home. And then a few years later, it says that from our ancient fusion of all these different races, we're able to sympathise with all the tribes of humanity. That's not something I would expect a politician to say today, but it was very much the feeling, you know, during the period of empire. And we see that 100 years later, in the 1950s, Churchill's Minister for Colonial Affairs, a guy called Henry Hopkinson, he stood up in Parliament in the 1950s and he said, Our idea of Britishness is that anyone from throughout the empire, the dominions, what later became the Commonwealth, as long as they satisfy the status test of being a subject of the crown, which they all do in the empire, can move anywhere within that empire and can proudly say, civis Britannicus sum, I am a British citizen. So where we've got to today really is a huge shift where I think pretty much for the first time in history, we now have a group of people who quite seriously are trying to put forward an ethno-nationalist view of Britishness, which really is quite alien to the concept of Britishness since it first began.
And when you look at the sweep of history that you have examined, is this trend something that can turn? Can the pendulum swing back, or is there something now inevitable about the trajectory that the country appears to be on?
History shows these things do turn. I mean, in medieval times, we had the massacre of all Viking people when people got upset about that. But what actually we see is that the vast sweep of Britain's history, let's go really all the way back, through Celtic, Roman, Viking, Anglo-Saxon, Norman, French, then Tudor times, the arrival of Asian people from Africa, then under the Empire and so on. It is a phenomenal melting pot and always has been. The idea that Britain's multiculturalism is something new is just not historically accurate. There wasn't this golden period in the sort of mid-20th century when Britain was not ethnically mixed. Its entire history is deeply ethnically mixed. So yes, I think it changes. I think we are at a particular moment now where a lot of different pressures, including economic and also just the social lack of cohesion as we try to find our identity after centuries of empire, is creating lots of these stresses. But it's not permanent.